Hello and welcome to Ensemble Designs, where we're doing a live webcast from our studios in Nevada City, California. Today we're going to be doing an in-depth training on the Multiviewer, and we'll be talking first to David Wood, who's the Chief Design Engineer of the product. He'll be going through the block diagram for us. So David, can you show that to us?
Monday, good morning, and welcome to our worldwide audience that's participating in this webcast. We're really glad to have you with us. We have a lot of information to cover, a lot of interesting features, and I hope that it's all useful to you. So I want to start by looking at the Multiviewer from a block diagram standpoint. The user interface that we'll be seeing this morning is going to be using these icons here that represent the resource of the Multiviewer. And this is a block diagram of that fundamental resource, which is a 9480 Multiviewer submodule. Now this submodule can put up to 8 sources and 4 clocks on 1 or 2 screens. The real power, though, is in the architecture of how this can be used within the 9430 routing switcher. So let's take a look at where that sits inside that architecture. Now, the 9430 could be configured, for example, as a router with 30 ports. In this example, I have 20 input ports and 10 outputs. And the Multiviewer is sitting inside that system. So all of these input sources can be delivered to the inputs of the various channels or cells within the Multiviewer. And all of that routing capability is built into the router. It doesn't require any external cabling to integrate this Multiviewer with the sources you already have connected to the router. Furthermore, if, for example, the layering engine was a part of this system, then the outputs of the layering engine are also available as inputs into the Multiviewer. And then finally, all of the original sources, the layering engine sources, and the outputs of the Multiviewer are then routable to any output of the router. That means that any output of the router can deliver Multiviewer or any one of the other sources to a monitor, to an encoder, to a display. And this flexibility in how sources are handled within the routing architecture translates into a lot of power in your facility. It means, for example, it supports an important feature that lets the operator choose a particular cell in the Multiviewer and route it directly to the output they're looking at for QC monitoring. Now, even though we're showing here the functionality of the Multiviewer submodule within the router, it's also possible to purchase the Multiviewer as an MV82, which is a single avenue card with 8 inputs and 2 routable outputs, or an MV164, which is a pair of cards that will give you 16 sources to up to 4 outputs. So a lot of flexibility in how the pieces can be used, and all of the functional features that we're going to look at today are equally available in all of these configurations.
Right, I think you've demonstrated how flexible the product is. It definitely can do a lot of different things. It can be used as a standalone Multiviewer or integrated fully into the router. So, and I forgot to mention this earlier, please make sure you text us or call us with your questions. We want to answer them live during the broadcast. And if you see me occasionally looking at my computer, I'll be checking out messages that my colleague Jay Warner is sending to me. So now I promised you in the lead up to this webcast that you would be able to create a Multiviewer output in 10 seconds flat. And I'm going to prove that to you right now, that anybody can do it. So if we'll switch to a screen of my computer, and I'm going to go to a layout that is blank. It's called Monday's Demo. And you can see I have a blank screen here. So let's create this Multiviewer output in 10 seconds or less. I'm going to go to the edit screen. And now here we go. I think I can actually do this in less than 10 seconds. There, we're done. And we can go to the live video output, and you can see it's live to air, that it happened that quickly. Now, just to impress you even more, I'm going to show it to you on my tablet as well. I'm going to go to my edit menu, Hopefully my network in here is good. Sometimes when you have a wireless device, it's not good. So I'm going to get rid of all of these ones that I created already. Okay, and the big one. And let's create a quad split. And there we go. Live on air, you can see we're outputting that quad split. Now, just to show off, I'm going to show it to you on my cell phone. Look at that, the Multiviewer output on my cell phone. So I think we've demonstrated that this is a very flexible product that can be controlled on multiple devices very quickly. And I believe if you were timing me, that was definitely less than 10 seconds, I think, for all 3 devices. So now to talk about operator usage the stylistic look of the product and how to quickly change cell design is John Pichitino, sorry, our technology evangelist.
Hello, Monday. Hello, everybody. How are you? As you can see, Monday put together the layout for our Multiviewer display very quickly and very effectively. What I'd like to talk about a little bit more is the aesthetics. How do we get the individual cells to look the way we want and to display the information we need? Now, before we get going here, one point I would like to make. I'm doing this live, so we're going to be able to see this over our shoulder on the display that's behind us as well. But this could be done completely offline. In other words, I could be designing these displays and setting up these cells completely offline without having it affect the display that's already in use at the particular time. So I'm going to start with the display that Monday put together here, this little quad split. And we're going to look here on this upper left-hand corner of the red car. And in the top right-hand corner, you notice it says source. And if we pull this down, it lists all the different sources that we can assign to that particular cell. So in this case, I have camera 1 selected now. Camera 3 is the source that is in there. So you get the idea that any cell then can be selected which source goes to which cell. Now, to design then, or to start playing with the aesthetics of this, what we do is down in the lower right-hand corner, we hit the little button that says Config. And when the config comes up, now we have a bunch of different features that we can start adding to our individual cell or our display. The first thing that it's asking us here is, do you want the image to be full screen? In other words, taking up the entire cell size. Or do we need to push it back a little bit, 85% in size, so that we have room for things like audio meters and labels and things along those lines? So in this case, what I'm going to do is say, yes, I want it to be 85%, and I want to change the background color around the outside from being black to a different color. So let's swing around here to the blue. We'll pick a point here. Now we've got a nice little blue border around the outside of the image itself. Great, I like that. Aspect ratio then, if it's a standard definition image that's coming in or source that's coming in, do you want it to be 4:3 or 16:9? So that's what that's asking for. In this case, we're going to leave it at 4:3. And then closed captions. Are we going to display closed captions within the cell itself? And so we can determine whether we want the 608 or the 708 closed captioning to be displayed within the cell. These sources don't have closed captions, so we'll leave the closed captioning off. And down here are some GPI features that we'll get into a little bit later. All right, we've got the background okay. Now let's go to the next feature, which is a frame. We'd like to put a frame around the outside of the image. Now, you'll notice that as I'm adjusting medium and thick, the picture is actually scaling. It's actually becoming smaller. You will always see wall-to-wall pixel, every pixel side to side, top to bottom. So as we change sizes or put borders around the outside of this, we're not covering up any of the image. Now, why would we want to put a border around the outside? Well, it can be used as part of our tally system, which we're going to be talking about and showing you here in just a moment. Now, in this case, I want to change the frame color from being black. I'll select a little lighter color that's here. And by the way, if you have a color that you like, you can just simply assign it to one of these little swatches here on the right-hand side for instant and easy recall. All right, so we've got a nice little blue border around the outside. I like that. And now it's going to ask us about labeling. Okay, do we want to have it labeled of what this particular cell is? So by checking the box that says enable, what we've now done is turned on the the label that we want associated with that cell. The label then comes from where? What we have is the port name, so that would be the name of the individual inputs that we have put into the system that we could go in and name individually on it. We could put a custom name on it, for example, camera 1, Bob, camera 2, Bill, etc. And then we could have it externally brought in as well if you have a device that is capable of being able to bring in those sorts of names from, say, a routing switcher or so. And then a custom label text allows us to be able to type in what that custom label would be. I'm going to leave it here with the port name that we assigned for that particular input. And on the far right, it says, where would you like this positioned? Would you like it positioned in the bottom center? Would you like it in the upper left corner? Would you like it in the upper right corner? You get the idea. And so we're going to leave it at the bottom. And then how large or how small would we like that text to be? So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. All right. Great. Now, sometimes in order to be able to read these labels a little more effectively, what we'd like to do is put it over a little background so that it's easier to see over top of video or over top of your little background. And so this little background area here is putting a little bit of a black or a little bit of a color behind the label itself so that it's a little easier to read, a little easier to see. And it has the ability to fit to the size of the text, so as you type whatever size the texts are, it will scale itself accordingly. Or I could just have it go the full width across the screen, and so now you could see it's covering the entire bottom half of the screen itself. I'm going to leave it to fit to text. And the color background, you notice the same display that we had before, but we have one other feature that's here, which is transparency. So we are now able to make it a little bit transparent so that we could see through it, particularly if we had it positioned in the upper left or the upper right. All right, so that's looking pretty good at the moment. Now what about tallies? How are we going to tell that that cell is on the air? So we go over to tally. We have two different tally positions. They're identical. We're going to go to tally 1. And what we first thing have to do is it going to be controlled with GPI? So okay, yes, it's GPI, and which one are we going to control it with? And what is going to tally? We're going to tally the frame, that's that little light blue border around the outside. We're going to tally the label background, the little area, the transparent area behind the text itself. We could have the text change as well, but if they all turned red at the same time, we couldn't read exactly what it was. So we'll leave the text being unchecked at this point. So when we hit the tally, it would look like this. And so now we know that that cell is on the air because the border and the label that's behind, the background that's behind the little label is now turned red. So that would give us then an indication that we are on the air. Indication we're on the air. All right. Tally 2 does exactly the same thing, and it's exactly the same menu, except maybe it's a red-green feed that we're talking about here. And so what we'll do is we'll enable the same things in this case, and instead of making it a red color, we'll select a green color. And that way we know, okay, the secondary feed is going to have the green color assigned to it. And so when that is on, we know that that's going to our secondary feed, the red would be to the primary feed, and we have an indication on those cells which sources are being fed to which feed. Great. So that looks pretty good. We've got our tally that's all set up. Our frame is around the outside. I've got a nice over background. What about audio meters, right? We would like to be able to see if there's audio associated with it as well. And so we're going to go over to the next tab here, which says audio. And it says audio meters. How many groups do we want to display? And remember, a group is 4 channels. So in this case, we could say 1 group, which would give us the 4-channel display. We could have 2 groups, which would be the 8 channels display, or we could have all 4 groups, all 16 channels displayed alongside as well. Then it's asking, what is your reference level for the transition between the red and the yellow? And also then the peak display as terms of, okay, it'll tell us where the peak level is and how fast does that decay back to the individual audio meter. In this case, we'll leave it as slow. The alarms tab we're going to talk about shortly. So I'm going to leave that alone for just the moment. Once I have this cell style set up the way I like, I can save this cell style, and we'll take it up here, and it says Save Cell Style, and I'm going to call it Pitch. That's what they call me, Pitch. So There's my cell style and it's saved. And I'm done. So now we're going to say I'm done. And you'll notice that that's now been put as part of our multi-viewer display, and it has all the things that we set up. But I have these other 3 images that are here as well, and do I want them to look the same way? If I do, it's a very simple process of just simply saying this little eyedropper up in the corner, and these are sort of standard features or standard effects that can be done that people who deal with graphics are familiar with. In this case, we're going to use the eyedropper to select the cell that I want to copy, and then the paintbrush to say which cells do I want to paint them into or copy it into. So in this case, I'm just going to select this cell and this cell and this cell, and boom, we've done that to all 4 of these here instantly. Now, what happens then if we want to populate maybe smaller cells that way as well? Well, what we could do then is to say, I'm going to delete this upper right cell that's here, and I want to put 4 different cells or 4 different little cells in here instead of having one large cell. So what I'll do is I'll select the cell style to be pitch. That's the one we just made a moment ago. And now you can see that I'm just sitting populating each of these as we go along. Pretty slick, huh? Very easy to deal with.
Absolutely, and those are the sorts of controls that people are really familiar with using. Anybody who uses a computer is used to those. So the GUI is very user-friendly.
And very quick and very fast and easy to learn. Now there's one more cell style I want to talk about, and then I think we've got it pretty well covered. We can insert clocks in here as well. So in other words, these are just images that we've dealt with, but we may need timers or we may need clocks as part of our display as well. So under the cell style, we notice that we have clocks that are down here. So there's a default clock or a morning clock, one of the others that we had made. I'll say a default clock and I'll place it in here. In that configuration, so again, down in our lower right-hand corner in the configuration, it then lets us know, okay, what kind of clock is this, and how are we going to configure the way this clock looks, and the name of the city, if we're going to put a city on it, etc. Now, the first thing it's going to ask us is, did you actually want a clock, or did you want a timer? So we can have an up-counting timer or a down-counting timer. We could also have it as just a simple label, so that if we wanted to label our display in the lower right-hand side, we could use, if we have an extra cell, we could use that to say, this is my morning show setup, right? In this case, I'm going to say, well, we'll leave it for clock for a second, and I'll come back to the timer here in a minute. Now, I could do very much the same thing that we did with the individual cells. We have a frame, which we'll enable around the outside. We'll make it medium in size. We'll give it a color. There's our nice little color. The interior color around the San Francisco can also be changed, and so we'll select the interior color to be, how's that? You get the idea, right? So we could get that to look the way we wish. The label allows us to be able to tell us what city or what did we want to type into that clock, what did we want to call that clock. And then the clock itself then says, okay, what time zone are we working in? Do you want a 12-hour or 24-hour display, and what color are the graphics or the letters basically within the clock? All right, but let's go to something different. Let's go to a countdown timer, or a count up timer. What I want to do is have a cell in there that I, as an operator, can now be able to see what my segment times are, for example. So in the label here, I've changed it over to timer. I'm going to go to the label and say, all right, what I really want this to be is segment time. Hope I spelled that right. All right, very good. So that looks the way I like it. I can save it as a cell style, much like we did before. This would be a clock cell style. And I hit done, and now here is my segment time. And when we get to the operational portion of this in a moment, I'll show you exactly how to set the times and get it to actually start to clock and wind up as well.
Great information. Now we're getting a lot of great questions in, and what I'm going to do is, instead of saving them all for the end, I'm going to ask them as appropriate for the section that we're working on. So I'm going to ask you some stylistic questions right now that have come across.
Okay.
Okay. So one of them is, let's see, on closed captioning, is it per cell or is it global across the whole multiviewer?
It is per cell.
Great.
So therefore, each source can have its own closed captioning displayed within the cell.
Right, and I think that's unusual in the industry. I think there are some limitations on other multiviewers, so that's an excellent feature. Let's see. These are all operational. Okay, I think that's it for stylistic.
Great.
So thank you so much, John. I think John has demonstrated to us how easy it is to set up the style of the cells and to create layouts that you can use and quickly recall. And so to dive further into that about how it can be used, and I know you engineers are really waiting for this part. This is regarding control from external devices and alarms. So here to talk about that is David Wood.
Monday.
Hello
Nice
again.
to be back.
I know. It's been so
And good
long.
questions. Again, we appreciate everyone that is watching, and we encourage you to post more questions to us so that we can give you all the information that you're looking for.
And I do have quite a few questions for you when you get to the end, so we'll see
Okay.
how many of them you answer.
All right, I'll try to be pointed to it. So I'm going to bring up a layout that I set up earlier to talk a little bit about alarms and control. So I'm going to start with alarms. And in the page that I've built a layout here as a simple quad split. And we're going to take a look at alarms that we can assign to this cell here in the upper left-hand corner. So if we look on the user interface, I can go to the Alarm tab. That's the last tab that's used here to configure the look and the behavior of this cell. So in the alarm system, I have enabled alarms for this cell. And again, along the lines of the question earlier about closed captions, alarms can be configured on a cell-by-cell basis. So I have enabled the alarms. I have a choice here as to whether this alarm appears on the Multiviewer screen itself. I can turn that off, I can turn it on, and finally I can choose persistent. Persistent is what I've chosen, and that means that when a alarm condition exists, it will be presented, and even after the condition has cleared, it will remain there until the operator has acknowledged it. I can alarm on a number of parameters in the signal. I can look to see if there's a loss of signal altogether. I can look to see if the source material has frozen, and I can look to see if the source has gone to black. And for each one of those parameters, I can set the amount of time that I'm willing to tolerate that condition, because of course, there's lots of program material where it does go to black as a natural course of events. So I've enabled a loss of signal and a freeze. And then finally, I can enable audio alarms that will look to see if the audio content in any one of the 16 channels has been lost. And we can set the threshold at which the detector will make that choice. So here we have this set of alarms configured. And through the magic of our control room, they froze this source that's feeding into the Multiviewer, and boom, up comes the alarm. So it says fault, the video's frozen, it started rolling again. The alarm remains, it shows that it's cleared, and it now has a yellow border around it. And that prompts the operator to see that even though they may not, I can't imagine operators aren't paying attention, but if they weren't noticing it at that moment, even though it was a short-lived event, they will be able to see that it's there. Now, we're now looking at the user interface. Now, everything that we've looked at up until now has had to do with how you configure the screen. But there is a web interface for the operators, say in a control room, to use as part of their daily work. And they get to see a web view of the Multiviewer that also includes this notice that there was an alarm condition. And the operator now has a checkbox, a little click box that says OK, and the operator can click on that. It drops off of the web view, and if we now look at the actual Multiviewer display, that alarm indication has been cleared as well. So I think one of the powerful things here in the alarms is the ability to monitor a number of parameters, and this monitoring is taking place on every single cell where you have set it in the configuration. It's not just monitoring one cell, it can be set up to monitor every single cell, and the parameters can be customized for each of the cells. In the operator's web view that lets them look at what the multiviewer is doing, but to look at that from a distance, a chief engineer at a facility could log in to the control room multiviewer from home and look at conditions and see all of those alarms. Now, another control question that we want to talk about is how can some of the functions of the multiviewer be managed externally? So we've looked here at how we can configure and set up the layout of a display. And we've touched briefly on some of the operator controls. We'll talk more about those in a moment. But we can also tie in external controls. So for example, tally can be brought in through a GPI interface. And the alarm functionality, we looked at how the alarms are displayed on the multiviewer display. We can also enable a GPO, an output closure, to indicate that there's an alarm. And it has the same choice of off, on, and persistent. It also has a pulse choice. In that case, the GPO will be activated for 1 second when an alarm condition begins, and that could be used to ring a bell to alert an operator that an alarm condition has begun. And then the GPI and GPI input can be configured to activate the clear function so that the act of acknowledging an alarm that the operator uses to clear it, that can be accomplished through a GPI input, and they could have a button on a console for that purpose. Finally, with alarms, I'm going to go back to that operator page that we were looking at. And the operator page has a position where the operator can now bring up a log of the alarms. So the alarm that we created, that we looked at earlier, it showed here that at 8:25 this morning, the signal froze at 8:25 and 24 seconds. And it cleared 5 seconds later, that the signal was restored. So that log is running and is collecting all of the alarm information. The operators can view the log. Again, chief engineer could log in remotely to this screen and bring up the log and look at it. So those are some of the control functions and the ability to integrate alarms into the system. You
Great.
said you had some questions.
I have a lot of questions here for you. Okay. So let's start. First one, does it work on any web browser?
Yes, any modern web browser. So right now we're operating it here on Chrome on a Apple OS X system. It operates on Chrome, on Safari, on Firefox, and on Internet Explorer.
Excellent. Okay, so this goes back to a more question about the structure of the product, the block diagram. Takas from Greece is asking, how do you cascade for more inputs and outputs? For example, a 48:6.
So if somebody wants to build a larger system, these are modular products. These cards go into the Avenue frame.
Right.
And because it's a web browser, it's very easy to take the browser from one screen to the next. So for example, a 48:6 system could be accomplished with 3 MV164 cards.
Right.
That would give you a total of 48 inputs. And an MV164 has up to 4 outputs, depending upon how the resources are organized. So for example, here we have a quad split. This is using one output of an MV164, right, but it's only using 4 of the inputs. So a single MV164 could have 16 inputs and 4 independent quad split outputs.
Right.
So there's a tremendous flexibility in how inputs and outputs can be organized. And again, it's modular, and so it's easy to go from a small system to a large system.
Excellent, excellent point. Okay, so the next one, how many GPIs are there?
There are several ways to connect GPIs and GPOs into this system.
Okay.
And so we're using, we support GPI and GPO interfaces from two manufacturers. So these are devices that provide a contact closure inputs and contact closure outputs. And they are connected into the system on the same Ethernet control network that's being used. This is very convenient because it lets you put these GPI interfaces at the position where all of these individual wires are, and you don't necessarily have to run them all the way to the multiviewer itself. And the fundamental interface supports 25 GPIs and 25 GPOs per MV164.
That's a lot.
It is.
Okay, next question. What is the protocol if you're going to use a label from external routers such as Harris or Grass Valley?
So depending upon the system that is present, that this becomes a large question because there are several different ways for this to work.
Right.
So one is if someone has a tally management system where they have a central server, and there are several manufacturers that provide those as a tally and source ID system, we can tie into that. And then we are developing and adding protocol support for cases where people don't have that, but they want to connect to a specific product. So
Okay.
to give a more detailed answer to that, we need to talk with people about the specifics of their system.
Well, that definitely ties into how helpful everybody at Ensemble Designs is. And if you're working on a system, we'd gladly work with people so that we can help you design it exactly for the customer's needs. So let's see, the next question. Okay, sorry, hold on just a second. How much latency is there in each of the cells?
That's a really good question. And so I'm gonna show off a little bit here.
Okay, good.
So I'm gonna bring up a screen layout. So I brought up a screen layout with 16 channels in it. And but I wanna demonstrate that this multiviewer system is using a hardware processing engine, which means that each one of these cells has its own dedicated processing path. We don't have one processing path that gets shared from one cell to the next to the next. And as the result of that, the latency is the same. First of all, the latency is very low, and it's the same for every single cell. So I'm going to make a new layout. I'm going to call it latency. And I'm going to just put a series of pictures in this layout. So I've built this new layout, and this is a good example. I built that layout offline, and now I am going to bring it online with a single click. And if we cut to the camera so we can see the layout actually change as I do it. So now with one click, I bring up a different layout. So I created that layout offline and switched to it. And now I'm going to put the same picture. I'm going to put camera 1 in every single cell. And we're going to see that all of the cells are going to change as the scene content changes, as there are cuts and dissolves in the footage that is coming in as camera 1. We're going to see that on the multiviewer output, they are all changing at exactly the same time. And so as soon as there's a cut in this content, or a dissolve to black, which isn't quite as dramatic, but we don't always have control over our source material. So, so as you watch here, you'll see that all of these cells are changing at exactly the same time. There is no latency difference from one cell to the next. And the total latency is on the order of 1 frame from input to output. And this multiviewer output is synchronous, locked and synchronous to house. So that's why we can actually present it here in this webcast, because we're taking this multiviewer, the multiviewer output, as a source to our live production switcher, and it can be re-entered into the broadcast because it's synchronous.
And the image quality is incredible. It looks very good. I don't know how clear that is on a webcast, but it definitely here in the studio is amazing.
And again, it's because each one of these cells has its own dedicated hardware. And the scaling technology that's being used to scale all of these images is the same technology that we developed for our award-winning Mito scan converter,
Which is one of our best-selling products, so that makes perfect sense. So we have some more questions here. Let's see. Now, I'm not sure I understand these questions, but maybe you'll understand the terminology. From Lars in Sweden, can logs say to what, either LOS or iOS? I'm not sure. Maybe we need to clarify that one.
I think LOS might mean loss of signal.
Okay.
And so the logs are being saved to the file system that's part of the multiviewer. And the operator can view the log. So again, if I come back here, I can look at a log. So I can bring up a log. But I also have the option here, I can download the log.
Okay.
And it will download it to a file on this machine. And we can also provide, for people that are interested in it, ways for a house management system to access and capture the log, say, on a daily basis.
Okay.
So there's a lot of flexibility in how those logs can be both used and accessed and stored.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Next, we're going to move on to operator usage and how all of the features of this product can benefit your company, saving you time and money. So back with us is Pitch.
Hi, everybody. Back again. One of the things that's really kind of unique or different here is the ability to be able to control how our display is set up, or be able to change displays very quickly and very effectively. Now, I've heard of facilities, Monday, that actually have different multi-viewers for different shows. So it's the same sort of control room, but they have one multi-viewer set up for the morning show and another multi-viewer that's set up for the evening show, and then they change their display to represent which multi-viewer they've got feeding. We're not very cost-effective in the process. So wouldn't it be nice if there were a way of being able to change displays instantly and quickly? And so the display that I've got in front of me here that you're able to see is now allows me to quickly change between different displays or different setups that we have for our multi-viewer. So you saw before where David said, okay, I want the 16 frame or the 16 different image display. Or I could say, gee, I want my morning show display. And so now we're able to put up our morning show. Now we're able to put up our noon show or late or evening show. And you notice how fast this is changing, and they're all completely different colors, different displays, all the different features that are on that. Now think about this for a minute. You could have and you recognize that we have multiple control positions here. I mean, here's Monday's computer here. I've got my computer here. Yes, we're side by side, but I could be in my office. I could be in the engineering room, wherever it may be, and still have control of this. But think of it in terms of a producer's position, where he wants to be able to see maybe his ENG feeds that are coming in. So he could now be sitting with his little computer or his little iPad or cell phone, and he could be having his display set up for his particular way of operating. Okay, I could see all my feeds, and I know how things look, and we're together on it. So he could have the technical director could have his for his display that's in front of him. If it's in sort of a live event environment, the control at the back of house, they too could have their own display and have what they want routed into each of those cells that are there in the corner. Now, one of the things that I'd like to also point out here is that not only do we have the ability to quickly change we'll do the evening show display that's here, but you'll notice these little corners here that says solo and full screen, these little buttons that are on each of the cells. The solo means what audio do I want to listen to? Which cell do I want to hear? Is the audio there or not? In this case, I've got the program output, so coming out to our display would be the program audio. But if I were to select the solo from this cell, now I would be listening to the audio specifically from that particular cell. I'll leave it on the program. Now, some of these cells are a little bit small, and maybe we're saying, geez, am I seeing an artifact in there? Is there something that's a little strange? So what I could do is hit the full screen mode. And what that does is it now takes that particular image to full screen on my display. I can instantly say, oh, okay, no, that was just sort of just the way the video was. And if I then click again on the full screen, I go back to my multi-viewer display. So now you could see that we can quickly change our setups. We also have the ability to listen to whichever cell's audio that we want to listen to, and we can take each of those cells absolutely to full screen if I need to do some analysis of the video that's actually in it as well. So a lot of flexibility and a lot of cost savings too, because we can change displays so rapidly without having multi-viewers to do it.
Right, it's like one multi-viewer is actually multiple multi-viewers. I think that's an excellent point. So we have some questions for you on operator usage, or sort of in that vein. One person is asking, what are the types of inputs and outputs available? So in particular, SDI input standards, what are available on the product?
Well, they're the standard SMPTE sort of standards, right? So you have the standard definition, you have the high definition formats, the 1080s, and the 720 formats on it as well.
And 1080p
it's 3G,
as well?
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly.
Okay.
So we've got the 3G, so the 1080p, the 1080i, the 720, the standard SMPTE.
And then what the output is.
It would be 1080. So whether you want P or I, that's selectable, and that's up to you.
Right, and something that's a little bit different and is that it comes out on an SDI BNC cable. And some people question that because a lot of multi-viewers have HDMI outputs, but we actually see it as a benefit because SDI can travel a much further distance than HDMI, so you no longer need to have the multi-viewer in the same room as the monitor. You can have it in the machine room, the noisy machine room, you can have it away, you can run the cable a long distance, and then you can use a very inexpensive converter to HDMI to come into your monitor if you're not using an SDI sort of standard monitor.
Very good point.
Yeah.
You know, I just recognized, I'm sorry, I know you're in the
No,
middle of questions,
you're
but
good.
there's something I've recognized that I failed to sort of talk about, which was our segment timer, all right? And so this is where we can set our segment times on it. You'll notice that in this upper left-hand corner here, I have time up, so it's counting up. And we can hit the clear button, and then that immediately starts my segment time over again. So if I'm trying to time a particular segment that's there, how much do commercial break it, what have you, I could just simply hit the clear button, it resets it to 0, and now I've got the time for the next segment. I also have a countdown timer so that we can then actually place in a time that we want it to count down from, so it'll count us down from a particular segment time to 0. And then a very cute little, I think a very neat little feature is called time until, where you can set a time of day. I want to be out at 11:59:30. And so now I could take my time of day that's there, and it will count me down to that particular time of day. And then when you go past it, it turns red to let you know that we're past that time of day, by the way. And so in this case, we're way past it. So in any event, you get the idea that we can now have several different ways of controlling the timer.
The clocks, yeah, which can be very helpful during live events and any sort of event production. So I think that's the end of the questions. I think we've answered all of them. I want to thank you for joining us today. We know that your time is really valuable. And I want you to know that this multi-viewer is backed up by Ensemble Design's 5-year warranty and our commitment to service. We're really looking forward to helping you spec these into your customer sites. We know that the customers are going to be so happy because the product reduces the amount of equipment that they need. It has a very low operator learning curve. It's so easy to use. You're going to save a lot of time and money on training operators. And you know, we just think it's an amazing product, and we're hoping that you're going to demo it and see it for yourself. So thanks for joining us today. And if you have any additional questions, make sure you send them to the sales team. We'll be looking forward to helping you guys out.